The Literary Corner, brought to you by New York Parrot TV, the voice for humanity. Hi, this is the most amazing collection I have read so far. I'm a reading-aholic. Dustin Pickering, you know me from Parrot Literary Corner. This is the Literary Parrot, available at Amazon.com and its various affiliates. If you have not seen this collection, it's 249 pages of glorious global literature in a contemporary vein. This covers a lot of subjects from the coronavirus to violence on the streets, to love, to romance. Everything you can imagine is in this collection, and you should buy it now. I'll tell you why. It's a collection of unique voices from the Literary Parrot. People have been on our show, have been participated in this, or have been published on our website, newyorkparrot.com. So please, I implore you, buy a copy. Thank you, and
Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hello, welcome to New York Parrot's Literary Corner, and good morning. I am your noble and honest host, Dustin Pickering. Today we have Dr. Srividya Sivakumar. She's a poet, teacher, columnist, and speaker. She has two collections of poetry, The Blue Note and the critically acclaimed The Heart is an Attic. Her weekly column, Running on Poetry, appeared in the Hindu's Metro Plus for 22 months. Her column, Srividya Speaks Poetry, currently appears in the online literary magazine, Narrow Road. Srividya is a Best of the Net nominee in 2018, was shortlisted for the W.E. Kamala Das Poetry Awards 2020, and longlisted for the Deepankar Kwiwana Memorial Prize 2021. Today we're going to discuss the anthology that she helped co-edit. It's called The Shape of a Poem. So without further ado, let's talk about what is the shape of a poem. What is the basic this anthology? What was your idea behind that?
Hi everyone. Thank you, Dustin, for asking us to be a part of this. I'm really happy to be here representing Paresh Tiwari, the Bijoti, our publisher, and the anthology, The Shape of a Poem. The Shape of a Poem is actually Paresh Tiwari's idea, my co-editor, who asked me to be part of this entire journey. And we call it the Red River Book of Contemporary Erotic Poetry from Around the World. So if you ask me what the basic premise of the book is, it is to celebrate the best of erotic poetry from not just the country, but from pretty much everywhere, all parts of the world. That's what the book is about.
Interesting. So how did you go about selecting poets for this? Did you do a general call, or did you go specifically to people you felt would qualify, or how did you go about selecting?
So we did a little bit of both. I think it was July in 2020 when we put a call out for this anthology, and we did it through social media. We also reached out to people that we felt might be able to contribute to the book. And from what I remember, because I just went through the numbers today, we had about 119 poets respond to that call with about 276 odd poems. And from which we've selected 79 poets who are in the anthology. So we did a little bit of both. It's very difficult. There were some poets who surprised us with their erotic work. We did not know that they write erotic poetry at all. So it was nice to keep it completely open to the public. And we as a result of that, I think we've had a really diverse collection of voices in the book. But primarily it has been the thrust of social media through Instagram and through Facebook that has helped us get these numbers.
Interesting. So a lot of social media calls, and of course there's the inevitable surprises of, oh, this person writes erotic poetry. Interesting. So you never know what people are doing, and they just need that call out. So why is the erotic important in this day and age? And do you find that the attitudes have shifted at all since COVID has come about?
I think one of the interesting things when I was asked to do this, the co-editorship along with Paresh, I was reading about the erotic in today's world, especially like you rightly pointed out with the times that we live in, which is COVID. And I read an interesting article in the paper which talked about how young people in Afghanistan, of course, before the Taliban regime has returned, young people in Afghanistan were learning of ways to handle living in this pandemic by embracing erotic verse. They were writing erotic verse, they were talking about it, they were discussing it. And you're never really too far from the erotic impulse in your day to day life. And I think what the pandemic has taught us, if we have the luxury for it, I would say, because there is also the inevitable needing to survive, being able to, put food on the table. But this need of human contact, human touch. I saw a photograph which showed an inflated rubber glove holding the hand of a patient in an ICU with COVID, because you don't have that interaction, you don't have that human touch. So I think if anything, the pandemic has shown us how important it is from a erotic and a non-erotic sense, but how important it is. And yes, I do think that the erotic impulse needs to be talked about more. If I'm not mistaken, except for Parrots of Desire, but that talked about ancient erotic poetry, there really has not been a collection of contemporary erotic verse that has come out from India that celebrates the world. We've had a lot of fabulous love poetry anthologies. We've had a collection of queer anthology, actually, a queer poetry anthology that came out last year. We've had the Bloomsbury anthology of love poetry, and in that the erotic is also celebrated, but we've not had something that focuses specifically on the erotic impulse. And I think we felt that there was something that needed to be addressed, primarily perhaps because Paresh and I we are love poets and erotic poets. So maybe we felt that we may be able to do some justice to this entire theme.
So this is an international anthology. Do you find that in doing the editing and reading the poems, did you find there are different attitudes internationally across countries? And was there was there some kind of commonality between how people view what is erotic and what eroticism really means?
That's an interesting question. I don't think I've actually differentiated and actually done a clear analysis on whether the poets from the subcontinent approach it differently to say a poet from the UK or the USA. What I have seen is a little more openness in discussing the erotic impulse abroad than in India. And we've seen that also sometimes when we've approached magazines or writers to write about the anthology, for instance, you can sense a slight hesitance. In fact, I mentioned it in the foreword as well. We had an extremely senior award-winning writer who told us that she neither reads nor writes erotic poetry. And then we had another publisher of a magazine tell us that she would not carry a review of the anthology if it ever came out. And basically this kind of snide belief that somehow the erotic is not as important as XYZ theme. And that has been a huge surprise for us. I think for someone like Paresh and I who actually write about it, we don't really see it as something extraordinary. It is just one of the many themes that we write about. But there definitely seems to be some sort of a stigma attached to celebrating the erotic impulse. What I actually saw, Justin, was a commonality of themes. For example, you will find that the erotic is removed from the whole trope of the romantic lovemaking scenario. There are poems that discuss the erotic in the scene of domesticity. I can remember Namrata Karthik's poem or Pooja Ugrani's poem, which talks about just the erotic being a part of everyday life, right? Because after a point of time, that impulse also becomes just part for the course. There's a poem written by a US-based poet, which is dedicated to her first husband, to her ex-husband. So I found it interesting that there are various voices that celebrate the erotic at different themes. There's the passion of, that attraction and what it means to somebody. There's also there is a huge difference in voices. For example, we have Dr. Hoshang Merchant, who gave a face to queer literature in the country. And then we also have a very young person who identifies as queer as well, and I think has been published for the first time in the anthology. So there has been a wide variety of voices. So I don't know if they are different. I think for me, it felt that they were very, very similar in many aspects.
Right. So there's very similar attitudes. Do you find that stigma, do people that have that stigma, do they associate eroticism with, I don't know, pornographic material, or
Yes.
did you find that was a sort of like a prejudice on their part, that a lot of times they just thought it was like a pure sexual, poetry, or not
Yes.
really erotic per se, that's a totally different spectrum of feeling?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, that's one of the things that a critic who reviewed the anthology, it's coming out in December, said that they thought it would be too much. To be honest with you, if you gave me an anthology of erotic poetry and asked me to read it from the first to the last without any break in between, I would think it's too much. I've actually attended a reading of erotic verse many, many years ago, and I found I got tired at the end of it. I mean, it's nice that there are different ways to celebrate it, but where's the relief? But I think one of the points that you made is definitely true. We don't seem to differentiate between erotic, pornography, smut, or lovemaking. We got some, or love poetry. We got some sublime love poetry. But we were very clear that we didn't want it to be a love anthology, because we've had some very, very good anthologies that have just come out. And our idea was very clear. We wanted it to be an anthology that focused on erotic poetry. So yes, there is certainly a prejudice. I think it's a little judgmental. Maybe I'm too close to the project. I might be completely wrong, or I might be judgmental myself. I think there is a slight judgment call here when somebody says that the erotic is not as important as, look at the issues that we are dealing with in this world. How can you talk about erotic right now? But that's the whole point. The erotic impulse has never left us. It hasn't left us for centuries. Forget the modern times that we live in. So why not discuss it? It's not like people are not thinking about it or talking about it. But somehow when it comes to writing a poem or celebrating it or being open about it, there seems to be a little bit of reluctance. I think that would be the word, to embrace the idea. We have certainly seen that.
Absolutely. It's definitely interesting to see when you put something out in the world with the different attitudes that come from that, and what you can learn from people in general as you see the reactions to what you're putting out there. And what we're seeing is a lot of people feel like this is not a priority, or maybe they don't really understand what erotic is. And so, you learn from people a little bit. Maybe, hopefully, they'll learn from the experience of hearing of this anthology and getting an idea of what erotic really means, and maybe develop a sense of that. Erotic could be, is something as profoundly simple as eating an apple in a way that you experience it and describe it. The sensuality involved in the taste and the feelings associated with that. And it doesn't have to be, is the word we use, pornographic or sexual or anything like that. It could just be the way you experience a moment in a way, So do you find, what were some of the most, I don't want to ask you to pick favorites or anything, but were there really compelling poems that stood out for you as you were writing or editing the anthology?
Oh, yes. We actually had a very tough time narrowing it down to the number we wanted. We didn't want a really bulky anthology. We wanted it to have some heft, no pun intended, but we also didn't want it to be very large, because we were working with an independent publisher and we wanted to keep it small. So early on, we decided that we may have choices, but we both had to agree. So we were allowed to choose. So if we both agreed, the poem immediately went into the anthology, and we were allowed to present our case to the other. So there was a particular poem that I liked, but Paresh probably did not. I was allowed to talk about, not allowed, we were given the opportunity, we gave ourselves the opportunity of actually presenting our case and saying why that was important. But some poems, definitely, I think the sparseness of haiku, right? Using haiku to put your point across, it was very interesting for me, because I don't come from that world at all. That's Paresh's world. I write poetry and I write prose poetry, but so to choose a haiku poem, there were some poems that I was not invested in at all. But then when you start looking at it from the lens of haiku, you see them very differently. A lot of poems by young people, I'm excited. You know what happens, no, Dustin, after a point of time, we see the same names in anthologies because we're looking at a small pool of people writing. But when you open it up internationally, you have poets from across the world, and a lot of poets whose names I was not familiar with. Even in India, we had, like, there's a poet who made his debut in publishing with an erotic poem, which was very interesting for us. I mean, imagine who would start with that, but he did. So that has been an interesting journey for us. There are certainly some poems that stand out extremely starkly for me, but yes, I'll not play favorites, but yes, some very compelling poems.
Right. It's hard to pick sometimes when you go through so many poems and you have such a large amount of work that you're publishing. And like I said, I didn't want you to pick favorites, just what you thought was most compelling. How was the collaboration? We have Paresh here says, "You more than represent us." Is what his comment was. Thank you so much for watching today, Paresh. And what I was asking is, how was the collaboration? I mean, how did you guys balance the responsibilities of what was being selected? Did you guys have some heated discussion about, well, this poem should go or this poem should not be in, or,
Yes, we did. I think the advantage we have is, this initially when this was suggested to me by Paresh, the idea was actually two women poets who would go in to create this anthology. And I was a little wary because I had no editorial experience at all. He's already done the Red River Book of Hyben, which is very widely reviewed and extremely popular, but I had absolutely no experience. I was a little uncomfortable. Plus the theme was daunting to me. So in the beginning, when we decided that we would do this, we knew only that we wanted to do it and nothing else. We drew up a couple of ground rules, and it's been smooth sailing. It was smooth sailing. I think we share a sensibility which is similar. I know the kind of poems that he's drawn to and I'm drawn to as well. There's some similarity between those, which also made it a little difficult for us to choose poems that were very different to what we write. Those were the things that we both argued for a lot. Right, I would choose a poem that I felt was a little out of my comfort zone, but therefore needed to be in the book because it made such a compelling case, and then to convince Paresh and vice versa. There were some poems there was one poem in particular, I just didn't see the point of it at all, and we had such a long discussion on it. And the beauty of these discussions was it constantly allowed me to check what I felt about erotic poetry, what I knew about it, and there was a lot of change in the way I looked at erotic poetry myself. So I think that was a huge advantage. But it's easy to work with somebody you already share a rapport with. He is one of the poets I consider a friend, not just a poet acquaintance. So it made it very easy, therefore, to work with him. I don't know if he would give you a different answer, but this is my answer. It was very easy to work with.
Yeah, I'm sure he would. He said, you more than represent us earlier. So I think he's in definitely in alliance with your opinion that you guys worked. It's really, I've collaborated with editors too, other editors, other people when I edit volumes, and it's really interesting these discussions that emerge, and you don't just learn about your opinions. You balance your opinions off of somebody else, and you come to conclusions together in a collaborative discussion. And sometimes you're not happy with the results, but you've learned something. You've come to some kind of conclusion about where you're standing and why you stand there. So one interesting question I had was, how does the natural world reflect eroticism from a poet's perspective? And there's some, I'm sure, like I mentioned, the peach, and is there a lot of images from nature in some of these poems?
Oh, yes. In fact, when you were talking about biting into the apple, I was reminded of that poem. I'd actually marked it. The whole idea of just choosing a fruit was made erotic. So the point that you made is absolutely how I look at the erotic as well. We are talking about the pleasuring of your senses in every way possible, whether it is, so that's what we say in the flap of the book, even passing a salt cellar across the table can be an erotic act. Not that you're constantly thinking of everything being erotic, but you're aware that there is the erotic impulse around you. So yes, a lot of nature abounds, a lot of the actions as well. And that was another thing that we wanted to do. We wanted to give a wide variety of situations, for want of a better word, that spoke of the erotic impulse. So if we felt that this situation had already been dealt with in another poem, and that poem was stronger, then even if this poem was great, we actually let it go. So that was a little challenging for us, because you know how it is. The whole idea of erotic itself is so subjective. I remember early on when the book came out this July, a poet of ours had shared her poem on her Facebook page, and one of the comments was, "Yeah, but how is this erotic?" So I was thinking, should I get into this battle and then say, why? And then I said, no, forget it. It's not going to work. No, Dustin. How we look at something is totally different. You will get accused of bias and subjectivity, no matter how objective you've been in the entire process. So there might be something that a person considers erotic that other person does not consider erotic at all. But yes, there are a lot of references to some very obvious references, but some extremely, where did that come from? Those were the kind of poems that we wanted to pick up, something that that was unexpected really for us.
Well, we're going to take a brief break and come back with you in just a second. So I hope everybody's enjoying this program. So let's hear some music for a second here.
They often wonder aloud, can't we go back to the good old days when protesters were like Martin Luther King Jr., peaceful?
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
We answer, have you forgotten he was murdered as well?
What so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming.
Hoses, dogs, batons beat faces and heads, causing blood to spill.
Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous
jail cells moaned for relief as they were filled past capacity with black men in three-piece suits.
O'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming.
Bridges blocked on a bloody Sunday,
and the rockets regular, the bombs bursting in air.
a church firebombed, flames dispatching 4 innocent little black girls off to see heaven's gates.
Gave proof through the night that our flag was still
Volunteer
there.
voter registrars shot in their car as peaceful protesters were found dead on the side of a dimly lit road.
Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave?
Young black men sent to fight and die in war, yet here sharing lunch counters with whites was against the law.
Or the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Were those really the good old days?
That's a wonderful piece, The Good Old Days by Dion D. Hunter. We had her on the show yesterday. We're back with Srividya Sivakumar talking about the erotic anthology recently released. I believe Red River released this. Is that the name of the publisher?
That's right, yeah.
Excellent. So here's a question flowing from the video we just presented into a question regarding the anthology. Can social protest or can eroticism be social protest in a way, or can social protest be erotic?
I definitely think that eroticism is social protest, not just that it can be, because it looks like we live in a world where I think we've come from a time when things were a lot more permissive. For example, in Tamil literature, we have Sangam poetry. And Sangam poetry was talking about erotic poetry in 300 BC. So it's not like erotic poetry is new at all. So when people talk about women writing erotic poetry, oh, Srividya, you're a woman, but you write erotic poetry. I'm not doing anything trailblazing at all. I'm just following in the footsteps, some giant footsteps of people who've been doing it for centuries. Somewhere along the way, we've kind of cloaked it in a garb of civility and sophistication and so on. And by not discussing it, and this is just hypocrisy. Like I said, it's not that we don't think it. We don't discuss it openly. We somehow feel that we are somehow better for it. So I think by talking about the erotic impulse, by celebrating it, not just talking about it, not just tolerating it, but celebrating it, we're actually protesting against the hypocrisy or this kind of a cultural consciousness which says you need to discuss this but not discuss that.
Right.
I think we are making a stand against the gatekeepers of what passes off for what could be a literary theme. So it certainly can be. I do think that talking about the erotic today is a sign of social protest.
Absolutely. You define the gatekeepers. Do you feel that, in your lifetime, that we're more restrained in our discussions on those matters than we were, say, 1960s, 1970s?
From what I've read, yes, I do think so. We've somehow forgotten that it's not that we don't do these things. I feel like a lot of times our culture has become one of let's do everything, but let's keep quiet about it. How we present, I think I would draw a parallel to the way we present ourselves sometimes on social media. If you know that person, you know what they're saying on social media is really not who they are in reality, but they present themselves in a particular image. That has become the way a lot of people live their lives today. And which is sad, because by celebrating the erotic, because we're discussing that as a theme, but it could be any theme. By celebrating the erotic, we actually are better in touch with our nature and who we are, or who we are as essential real people than anything else. So yes, I do think, at least from what I see, there has certainly been a shift. But to be honest with you, some of the reactions that we received for the book surprised me as well. I mean, the negative reactions. The positive reactions, luckily, we've had a lot more of them than the negative reactions. So that gives me an extreme amount of comfort. But the negative reactions, or the kind of sniggering, or, oh, really, you're talking about this? But so those things surprise me, especially when they come from people in your own fraternity or sorority, right? You don't expect a poet or a publisher or an editor to come back to you with a statement like that. You expect them to have much more open minds than pretty much everybody, but that's not the case. That has been a sad learning, but definitely an SSV learning.
Do you have a copy of the book handy? Would you like to read a couple of excerpts from it?
Sure, I'd be very happy to.
Okay, excellent.
So, how many poems should I read?
Let's go with 2. You can pick whatever you think is appropriate.
Sure. I wanted to read, I remember writing. So Paresh and I came up with this small dossier of classic poems, erotic poems that we loved, and we wanted to put it out there. So we had the call out just to remind people that we were looking for poems. We put this dossier out in social media. And one of the poems that I definitely wanted was Ellen Bass's poem, Basket of Figs. And I remember writing to her and asking her if we could include her poem in the anthology. And I was extremely surprised that she wrote back the next day saying, yes, please do. And so Ellen Bass, who's a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, she's actually in this book. And what Paresh suggested, if you notice in our bios, in the copy that I sent you, Dustin, is he said, let's keep it to just 75 words so that we don't, there's not a huge difference between bios. So let's break it down to bare essentials, but let's also ask them what they think about the erotic. And that second para of the bio was very interesting because it's not just what they write, but we also want to know how they think. So we had a poet who wrote a really lovely erotic poem, but felt so uncomfortable telling us what the erotic was for her. So in her bio, there's no mention about the erotic at all. So that also was an extremely interesting idea. Okay, so you write about it, but you don't want to talk about it. So Ms. Bass says to her, the erotic is the life force, the entire realm of passionate tenderness, love and joy, the source of our deepest knowledge, the fundamental yes to being in a body that is mortal. So I want to start with reading Ellen Bass's poem. Okay. It's called Basket of Figs. Bring me your pain, love. Spread it out like fine drugs, silk sashes, warm eggs, cinnamon and cloves in burlap sacks. Show me the detail, the intricate embroidery on the collar, tiny shell buttons, the hem stitched the way you were taught, pricking just a thread, almost invisible. Unclasp it like jewels, the gold still hot from your body. Empty your basket of figs. Spill your wine. That hard nugget of pain, I would suck it, cradling it on my tongue like the slick seed of pomegranate. I would lift it tenderly, as a great animal might carry a small one in the private cave of the mouth. Basket of figs.
Excellent. And that's definitely has, you read it and there's no real explicitly sexual imagery. It's very erotic in the sense that you get textures, tastes, you get the warmth and the feeling of comforting in a way. And one of the lines that was in there is something like sucking the pain away from this thing. It's, very, very deep poem in its own right. And it's remarkably beautiful. So I'm glad that you were able to get that in there.
Yes, I'm excited. And she wrote such a warm email. I think I was at an especially low moment when I emailed her and I told her, this is some of the response. And she wrote such a lovely email and also sent me the PDF copy of Audre Lorde's, famous speech on what the erotic is. Mm-hmm. It just was an extremely comforting, reaffirming idea that somebody who, of her stature, believed in the book so much. It mm-hmm. really made me feel even more better about doing that. Yeah.
So if you want to read another poem from the collection.
Sure. I'll keep this one a little short, but I got a kick out of this poem. So we have Keki Daruwala, who's an extremely mm-hmm. senior poet from India. He is a Commonwealth Poetry Prize winner. He has won the Sahitya Academy Literature Live Poetry Laureate Award. He writes a political column as well. And when I asked him to tell me what he thought was erotic about, he says, erotic poetry means nothing to him. And he points out that the poem chosen for the anthology is a doomed love poem. And so we carried these lines, but his poem is so lovely. I'll just read a few lines because it's quite a long poem. So it's called, it's from The Night of the Jackals. And he says, so it's broken up into different stanzas. In one, he says, it is just the telephone between us, grey, impersonal. The children are sleeping, she says, come. She had to think of me now with the elements in full cry and the air smelling of lightning burns like a scorched belt. I park my car 11 blocks away. People scurry off the roads, and as the sky crackles, I press the buzzer hard and tap at the glass door along with the thunder. Tonight she'll be waiting, arched fully backwards, vibrant as new leaf. She sits there, white cardigan, dark slacks, laughing as she knits away, caressing the rug with her bare feet. The blankets over her children heave with their regular breathing. It will go well with her if I kiss them on their foreheads. Suddenly, she's in my arms, swarming. Her nipples and the grass outside harden together, tense with coming thunder. Kissing her on the neck, I nibble the words as they slur across her skin. Did the thunder frighten you? He said. Imagine that. Her nipples and the grass outside harden together, he said. Mm-hmm. Also this line, she is in my arms swarming. That imagery was so stark. So it was a long poem.
Naturalistic in there. Yeah. What we were talking about, sort of like the sensual and the and natural combining and a kind of a sense of unity and sensuality and bringing those together as erotic. And that poem really signifies that quite well. Very nice.
In fact, he actually ends this poem by saying, whenever you are near me, I flower.
Oh, wow.
I don't whenever you're near me, I flower. I've not seen a male poet actually say something like that. We use these terminology more, at least in my experience, I've seen it describe women more than men do. And this is how it ends. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Right, and I like it. He describes it as a failed love poem, because in a certain way, I guess it's not really a heartbreak poem, but in a way, it's a yearning that isn't quite satisfied, And so
Yes.
maybe that's what he meant by failed love poem, is like the yearning is so deep and so immense, and the longing is just pouring out into nature and into this person, and there's no way to fully satisfy it. It's just a part of that life force again that we mentioned earlier.
You're right. It isn't that the love poem failed. It's that the love failed, right?
Right.
So that word, it's very loaded. I think that term, it can be used anyway.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, and from your, how did you come about selecting poetry that would sometimes maybe contrast with your own personal preference as to what a poem is? I mean, do you prefer formal poetry, or do you like, surrealistic poetry, avant-garde? What as contrasting to your personal preferences and how you selected poetry, how did you go about, finding a wide range of voices?
I think it helps to have somebody who writes very differently to what I do. So Paresh writes haiban, and he's one of the most known haiku exponents in this country. So it helped to get that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of poems I prefer do have meaning, but they also don't have very large words. I mean, I teach English as a profession, and I have studied it as well, but that's my preference, which is why I said in the beginning of our interview that was one of our challenges. How do we choose poems that go against? We shouldn't have poems that are like us. I don't want people to see it and say, oh yeah, this is exactly the kind of poem she would write. I want people to say, I'm surprised by this choice. So that was something I was conscious of when I was choosing poems for the anthology. A lot of these poems are different to how I look at life in general, and how I look at poetry also. And that was the pleasure of it. For me, it was discovering my own prejudices or my own judgment about what I think a poem should look like. And who gets to make these decisions? Certainly I shouldn't. My job is to try and see if I can get together a wide variety of voices that also work for my co-editor and do the best job that I can. You've taken up a responsibility, and we took this responsibility extremely seriously and in extremely difficult circumstances. And I think we've done a sincere job.
So what are some interesting critiques or reviews you've received so far of the book?
Okay, so for that I may need to search a little bit. We had one critique which talked about. Could you give me just one moment so I can just find it for you? So
here at Literary Corner. If you want to leave some comments as viewers and subscribe to our channel while you're waiting, we would greatly appreciate that. So we're waiting for a few excerpts of reviews and some thoughts on these on this wonderful collection, The Shape of a Poem. It's a book of erotic poetry put out by Red River Publishers. We're going to hear some interesting thoughts on the book in just a moment.
So we had a young poet in the book. Her name is Nikita Parekh, and she was keen to do an interview with us, and we were okay with it. Normally, we don't really expect poets from the book to do reviews, and in that way, we've lost the opportunity to do a lot of really cool reviews because people who do some great reviews are already in the book. But she approached us saying, "I would just like to do an interview with both of you, and would that be okay?" And we said, "Absolutely." And so she wrote a couple of lines on this book, which was interesting, but for some reason I'm just not able to find it. Maybe I'll come back to it at some point of time. So she talked about certain poems. She is a linguist, Dustin, at heart, and her poetry is so language based. And that was one of the things she mentions. Like there's a haiku poet called Kala Ramesh, and this is again Paresh's genius. She sent us an entire poem from which she took just one line. And that became our poem. And it's a poem that's been talked about so often. It was surprising for us. We didn't think that a lot of people would be discussing it, but then a lot of people did discuss it. So she mentioned that, and she talked about the experience of just reading. And we've got a lot of comments about the way the book looks. So the font, this is Divya Jyoti's idea. I think Red River has pioneered this concept of poetry with art. And all through the book, starting with the first page, This is my co-editor, Paresh Tiwari's illustrations. So he was keen that the book have illustrations, and they were only women. So I said, could you please draw some men also for all the women? He said, yeah, it's tough for me, but I'll try. So this is another illustration that
nice.
created. Yeah.
Very
all through the book.
linear, like using line and using that to convey the image. Very nice.
Yes. So this is, I wish I could show you this entire book and how beautiful it actually looks.
It looks wonderful, actually. It's a very beautiful book. Why the title, The Shape of a Poem? Where does that come from?
This was the email ID that we created for people to send in their submissions. And we said, what do we call it? We'll call it The Shape of a Poem because it seems to have an erotic ring to it. And we were like, yes, let's do it. And then when it came time to come up with a title, we were sitting and I was sending him some titles, he was sending me. And then I don't know who decided, we said, let's just call it The Shape of a Poem. Because I feel that name, it speaks to what we're trying to do with the anthology, which is we're trying to create a body of work which talks about contemporary erotic poetry. And that's how it became The Shape of a Poem.
Interesting. It is a very, the idea of shape is erotic in and of itself, or it can be.
Yes.
It's quite interesting. I read through some of the poems, and I remember the first one had a sort of geometrical, the angle of the neck, and, I believe that was Kuntol, I think was her last name. Akitra?
Yes.
Very interesting poem. Yes, and I really, she's describing like kissing and the angles that the head takes, and very interesting. And that goes back into the shape, and it's a good way to open the book. There is with a poem that describes literally the sort of a geometry of eroticism in a way. So that's pretty neat.
Thanks for pointing that out to us because we went alphabetically, so it's just a happy accident for us that you picked up on the fact that it actually married into the theme very well of it being the shape of a poem. In fact, the cover itself is a shape. I don't know if you can.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. And that's a very, non-representational work. And it's mostly, it looks like it's mostly color, and the texture of the color kind of has skin tones and earth tones and, all in together. And it has a very holistic look to it. That's very nice.
Yes, that's what we hoped. And this is Paresh's designed the cover of the book as well.
Excellent. He did a really good job. What would be your final message to viewers concerning the book, or concerning just, poetry, anything you want to say?
I definitely would like to talk about the book. I think what we hoped is that by creating this book, we would start talking about the erotic a little more than we're doing right now. And I think what we need to understand about the erotic force is that it's not only a life force, but it is and it should be a very powerful literary force as well. And we make a strong point in the foreword where we talk about consent, we talk about body positivity. We are saying that in the space of consent, that's the only space in which you can have something erotic. You can't have it otherwise. So it's not for us, for Paresh and I, this book is not just about erotic poetry. It's about celebrating bodies, celebrating this impulse, celebrating consent, and having that autonomy over your own body in a world where it seems to be harder and harder to do so. So just the sheer pleasure of poetry, and it makes a great gift. It also helps you understand there's a wide variety of voices. One of the poets from the US actually wrote to us saying after they read this book and they looked at Paresh and my work online, they realized that there is a world outside where they live. And that's what we hope that the book will do. You'll see some very diverse voices from some surprising countries. So that's what we hope this book should. We want this book to do that.
Would you like to share some thank yous or some salutations with friends and family, maybe even your co-editors out there?
Definitely to Paresh, because I would not have been on this wild journey had he not suggested my name. So definitely to him, and to our publisher. We thought about a lot of different publishers. I was published by someone else and Paresh. And since it was Paresh's idea and we have a rapport with Divya Jyoti and it worked very well, how Divya Jyoti functions and creates, like the font is completely his idea and so on. I think it worked very well. And also all the contributing poets, we told them clearly that this was a no fee, no pay when we put the call out, and we really weren't thinking about sending copies to anybody, but we have actually done that. We've sent copies to our contributing poets in India and abroad. And because we felt that it was important. So, and to people who are reading, people who are responding, we've had some really lovely reviews on Goodreads. We have a lot of reviews on the Amazon page. Also, we've requested people who read the book to just come and leave a few words for us. It's been heartening. We hope that more people will pick up this book. It's available online. It's available for purchase. We've had poets actually pick up copies, not just for themselves, but their friends as well. What greater support does an editor need than to know that the poets who are in the book are actually who believe in the book so much that they buy copies of the book for people. So that's been a really amazing.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Srividya. It's been excellent talking with you. This is The Shape of a Poem. This is the book cover here. So thank you for joining us today. And all our viewers out there, thank you for watching. And if you have not subscribed to our channel, this is an opportunity right now to click that subscribe button on our YouTube. And thanks to all our viewers out there. And as well, if you would like to donate, anybody out there is welcome to donate to our PayPal to support the programming we offer. And Red River says, thank you for trusting Red River with this important work. And that goes out to all of the contributors out there who've contributed to this lovely volume of erotic verse. And again, I wanted to say PayPal would be paypal.me/nyparrot. And thank you, Paresh, for viewing as well and for your comments. Again, support this program at paypal.me/nyparrot. That's right there. If anybody out there, you're welcome to donate to help us support our production of this program. If you'd like to be a guest, we need guests. We need literary voices. We need all artists. We're looking for spoken word artists to share their work as well during our breaks and during our openings and closings. You can contact me, Dustin Pickering, at literarycorner@newyorkparrot.com. And it's been wonderful and pleasant speaking of this collection of verse. So I would definitely recommend picking up a copy of The Shape of a Poem. Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been pleasant.
Thank you so much, Dustin. Thanks so much, and good luck to the New York Parrot. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. Everybody out there, if you're viewing right now, subscribe, get some writing done, and have an excellent afternoon. Follow us on the foreign policy coming up next.
3 seemingly simple words are changing the course of history and driving protesters into the streets. I can't breathe. I can't breathe has been the final cry of too many of my brothers and sisters. And I can't breathe because their lack of oxygen is either caused by the boot on their neck or the stranglehold society has on the truth surrounding all of the positive impacts African Americans have had on all aspects of American history. I can't breathe because popular culture has been lulled into believing that there should be no
Literary Corner, brought to you by New York Parrot TV, The Voice.